and we're going to take questions from the audience. If you'd like to ask Robert, Jill, or Craig questions, now's your opportunity to do that. The question? So about a value-added investor. What is a value-added investor?
So, I mean, for our first investor, which was the very consumer-focused private equity firm, the idea that they understood consumers and how consumers think was attractive to us as opposed to just dollars. The big thing that they did for us was they had relationships and they knew people, some of whom I wanted to get a meeting with and they got me meetings with, and others that they couldn't get me a meeting with. I really wanted to meet Howard Schultz and talk about, because he was talking about banning electronic nicotine delivery at Starbucks, and I wanted to talk him out of that before that became official, and I never got the meeting. But they did get me the meeting with Dr. Carmona, the Surgeon General, and I used to have a philosophy, just get me in the room. So they were able to do that. But the best is you talk to other companies that they invested in, and you ask that question of the CEO: what value do they provide you beyond the capital? It's hard because if you get the references from them, they're going to give you people that are going to sing their praises. But if you try to figure out, you don't need them to give you the references. You can talk to people based on the internet who they invested in and ask that question: what other value did they provide?
I worked with a firm that had immense banking relationships in the business that I was in. They actually learned enough about how well we were doing that they opened up more opportunities. They were our greatest referral service that we saw for years. And that was kind of unexpected. And I guess now I would expect it because everybody was winning in that situation.
For me, it's the ability to win. Sometimes you're in the room with investors who are either new or haven't really changed the world, and not that I've changed the world, but their vision is about next quarter, next year, or something. And what I like is the fact that some of these guys come in with just really big visions and no limits on what they think they can do, and that translates to all of us.
Thank you. More questions? Brian? We have right here in the front.
It's a bit of a twofold question. So each of you spoke about identifying the right PE investor. Assuming that you're new to the field, you have a new idea, you don't really have those contacts, how do you identify those people? And also, how do you approach them? And how do you gracefully introduce them, entice them to sign the NDA? When they don't know who you are, and how do you convince them that they want to talk to you?
So the question is, how do you get a PE firm to sign the NDA and talk to you?
How do you identify them?
How do you identify them?
You mind if I go? I have a very unusual perspective on NDAs. And if you're a young entrepreneur or trying to get something off the ground, and you think you have the greatest idea on the planet, the chances are that 10 other people have it at the same time. And the truth is that if you walk into an investor who wants to steal your idea, he's gonna. And then he's gonna say, go ahead and come get me, right? So in my opinion, NDAs are not worth the paper they're printed on. You need to know who you're dealing with before you sit down and share your idea, but don't be afraid. I mean, everybody has great ideas. It's about executions. Who can execute on the idea? I was in a car once in 2006 with a driver, and he shared with me what was Uber. He had the idea for Uber. And I went, oh, that's kind of interesting. And I guarantee you he now works for Uber. It's about execution, not the idea.
So I'll say a couple things. I totally agree with Robert on the NDA. I wouldn't even bring it up. No VC will sign an NDA, and probably most PE firms won't either. And it's just, I'm a recovering patent attorney, and I can tell you, I used to have clients who come in to tell me their idea, and they'd say, well, I can't tell you. You might steal the idea. At the end of the day, I think you could take your idea to your number one competitor and give it to them, and they're not going to deviate from what was going to be their next product roadmap. And so I agree with Robert. I wouldn't worry too much about that. In terms of finding them, I was fortunate. So I followed an interesting path, which was I went to the analysts in Wall Street who covered my industry. for public companies, and we weren't public. But I called them up and I basically said, hey, I'm going to be in New York, which of course wasn't true. I was going to go just in case I got the meeting with them. But I'm going to be in New York anyhow next, it's such and such. And I'd love to sit down and meet with you and talk to you about, they were analysts for the tobacco industry. So, and talk about this new technology, electronic nicotine delivery that's disrupting the tobacco industry. And they all said yes, right? Because for them, this is their job. So I met with, Goldman Sachs and Wells Fargo and Morgan Stanley. And then they were like, we'd love for you to come speak at our conferences. So then I come speaking at their conferences. And who's attending their conferences? Fidelity, Morgan Stanley. And then they hooked me up with all of these one-on-one meetings. So in the end, I never hired a banker, and I never had a CFO like Jill. So I did all of those raises on my own, but mostly because these people were calling me. So because I had the exposure. But if you wanted to go find them, I don't believe in cold calling at all. Like if somebody reaches out to me and I don't know who they are, I just think they're lazy. Like just go on LinkedIn, figure out a way that you're one or two connections away, ask that person for an intro. And so same thing here. If you think you know somebody you want, figure out how you can connect to them in some warm-ish way.
I'm a pretty keep it simple girl. So again, I'll go back to my dating analogy, right? Where you're not always the prettiest one in the room, but there's somebody out there who likes the inside, right? We all want to think that. So again, go back to the story and know your story and talk about it. And don't be afraid. I don't think any good decisions are usually made in fear. And so talk to people and share your story, and it allows that story to become more practiced. And then by the time somebody knows somebody, then you'll be telling the right person your story.
More questions? Sure, Robert.
The one thing I would add is look at who's financing other people in your industry or adjacent industries, and look at their deal flow. Those are the people you want to talk to.
Does that answer your question?
Yes,
Thank you. More questions? I have a question for Craig, I think. So we talked about this. There's a lot of emphasis on people want to protect their patents. Which is more valuable, your patent or your trademark?
Yeah,
and why?
So, I was a patent attorney for 10 years, and if you asked me at the beginning of my career, it was always about the value of patents. And I just totally don't think that's the case anymore. I think patents, I don't want to say they're valueless, but they have very little value today. And I'll give a couple of examples. Right? No one in this room is not buying an iPhone or a Samsung phone because of their patent litigation. And I could take away all of Apple's patents tomorrow, and we'd still buy all of their products. If I took away their name and said they couldn't call themselves Apple anymore, that would be catastrophic to their business. If I took away all of Google's search patents tomorrow, you'd still go to Google and do your search. If I took away their name and said they can't call it Google anymore, catastrophic. So trademark is the real intellectual property value today. Part of that's because about 10 years ago, there was a Supreme Court case that kind of defanged patents where you couldn't really get an injunction anymore. And once that was removed as a recourse and you were left with reasonable royalties, it just wasn't a reason why people wouldn't steal your idea. So the real value is trademark. And my mentor told me a story that Benchmark initially passed on Twitter, I think at a $25 million valuation, and then invested at like $250 or $2.5 billion. And he said the reason we passed the first time is because we were like, there's no IP here. Like it's just a text message with limited by 140 characters. Like anybody can do that. And he said we didn't realize that there was IP. It was the trademark. That was the name was what was so valuable, and it took us a while to figure that out. So I think the real value at the end of the day is building a brand, building and I think private equity hasn't quite caught up to this yet. They still have what I kind of consider the box checking exercise. Where's your IP? Let me see your patents. They got to a little bit be educated that that's not as important as it once was.
Jill, Robert, do you have any comments to that about trademark versus patents?
I believe in trade secrets, not trademark or not patents, and the brand name is everything.
Yeah. One day we'll find a brand company here that can help out creating a brand. Sorry, a question?
Can you guys comment on how you interact with private equity individuals that might have an up-and-coming partner versus a more senior partner? Because in Arizona, you're more likely to have the hungry up-and-coming folks, and maybe not the full decision makers. How do you navigate that?
From a transactional standpoint, they're more annoying. But again, if you really hold to the rule of know what they want and deliver it, and the quicker that you can do that, the quicker that they're out of your day-to-day hair. And that speaks a little bit to the box checking, right? We can't deny that that is still a factor. And so learn what the boxes are and just go, because then you don't hear a lot, even from the young, hungry ones.
Yeah, I mean, it's challenging for me, I would say, because I'll use the family office analogy. I always said I've never closed a deal with a family office, and part of what's happened to me is you really have two decision makers. You've got the young, hungry person who's running the family office, and then you have the family. And you really have to get two yeses. If either one of them have any pause or hesitation, the deal's not going to get done. So what I much prefer where you're talking to the decision maker. When you're talking to the decision maker, then you just have to persuade that one person to do the deal, and then they send their minions to go fill out the paperwork. But it's very challenging with that young, hungry person. If they don't have decision-making authority, I've run into this problem on multiple times, even at the private equity side, where they're your greatest champion, and then they come, then you get like that sort of sober Monday morning phone call that, they had the investment committee meeting on Friday and it didn't go so well. So that hasn't been a good experience for me.
I think I do have a comment. The one thing I would add is train the young guy, train him, right? So that when he does walk into the investment committee, he knows what the hell he's talking about. Rather than I checked all these boxes, make him the evangelist, but not just the evangelist. To be excited and a cheerleader, give him meat and potatoes to deliver the message. But absolutely invest in training that person.
Thank you. Did that answer your question? More questions? I have a question for the panel. How do you make sure that everyone in your team knows the story chapter and verse? How do you make sure that they know it? So when someone calls, they know what the story, they know the why. How do you ensure that your team knows the why?
That's pretty easy for us. We have a couple standards, and I'll give you the one that I've learned to say without crying. So Televerdi has to be here today, because tonight there's a 15-year-old gal who's going to try meth for the first time. And that is going to send her down a spiral where she's going to probably create a financial scheme and eventually get caught. And we all parrot that to make sure that Televerdi has to be here, because she's not in jail yet, but she's going to be.
Thank you.
For
Standard company line.
so for
You're
me,
going to jail, honey.
it was never an issue for me because I really took to heart the adage of hiring people who are smarter than you. So I had a team of people that each one of them could have been the CEO of my company. And so I had no concerns about putting them alone in a room with anybody, going out to dinner with them, whatever, because they were all rock stars. And so I think if you hire the right people, then in some ways it was better for me. Because I would always brag about my people, like, oh, they're amazing, and then I would hope that I wasn't in the room, because then I knew they would see it, and they'd be like, wow, like they've got a deep bench. This is like an amazing company. Like, look, everyone's more impressive than the next. So I think if you really, take to heart that idea of getting those people who are, if you can take the ego out of it and not and want to be the dumbest guy in the room, which I was so happy to be on so many occasions, then it's great, because then those people are so impressive.
Greg, how did you induce those people to come to work?
So a couple things I would say. One is, so my mentor had said, look, if you're in a fast-growing company, you need, as the CEO, you have to be spending at least 25% of your time recruiting. Otherwise, you're just going to be underwater. And so I thought that was great advice. So I spent a lot of time focused on recruiting. And I would say in some ways it was not dissimilar to fundraising, which is storytelling. So you've got to sell them on this vision of how do you want to spend your time, right? What do you want to do? We're saving lives, right? I mean, we couldn't market that because that would have been a therapeutic claim that would have gotten us in trouble with the FDA, but we all knew it to be true. And so, I mean, to this day, and it's a similar story, Robert, to yours. I mean, I'm not with Enjoy anymore, and I was able to take some chips off the table, but the big upside that like Jules experiencing now, I missed out on. And I have people to this day, 5-6 years later, coming up to me. I was a 2-pack a day smoker. Your product saved my life. Like, you say, thank you for saving my life. Like, that's it. I'm happy as could be with that. So pitching that to people that to come work for us, do you want to go sell widgets or do you want to come change the world? It was sort of like I was stealing that line from that famous thing where Steve Jobs recruited the guy who ended up replacing him, who was the Pepsi CMO. And it's like, do you just want to go sell sugared water or do you want to come with me and change the world? Like, it was a similar pitch that I would do with people. So it gets back to start with why. I mean, I think Jill's got an amazing story to pitch to people to come work for her company. Like, we're out there changing the world. Like, we're making our community a better place. That's to me, I'd much rather do that than how'd you like to come make some money? I mean, that's just, to me, not very exciting. People can go make money elsewhere. So I think if you've got a mission and you're a mission-driven company, then that became my biggest recruiting tool. And then also once you get some of these amazing people, then I'd bring them along with me on some of these, I would do that at the lunches where I would bring all of these people. One of my favorite people who literally just made $100 million 3 months ago, who was my head of product development. I used to bring him to meetings because he was so colorful, and he'd gone from 0 to 10 million, 0, 10 million, and he was at 0 again when I brought him on these meetings. Then he's gone now to 100. And so one time he was in one of the meetings, and one of the people said, I just got to ask, what do you mean 0 to 10 to 0? Like, what happened? And he kind of got this big smile, and he took the Willie Nelson line. He's like, well, I spent 90% of the money on wine and women, and I wasted the rest.
More questions? By the way, we found somebody here that can save a CEO 20% of their time with recruiting. I think we'll talk about that in Vaco. Any other questions?
Well played.
Thank you. Sir?
How do you balance or come to a decision-making process, especially with fast-growing companies and industries like you guys have been involved in, where you're trying to figure out focusing on your first round of funding and executing your operations versus going for the second round and growing? You had mentioned making hay, right? What kinds of things do you go through when coming to those decisions or making a decision?
Well, I can tell you it was a disaster, like total disaster, because if you don't have a superstar CFO, which I never had, it's really catastrophic because you can't be running your business while you're raising money. So the business suffers because you need the money. So you have to go raise the money, and the business suffers. So that was the single most challenging aspect of my previous experience, and probably the thing that I struggled with the most, because it is a all-consuming process, the fundraising. I mean, it was probably 85% of my time, for those periods when we were doing that. And it's really hard to balance. I did a terrible job at it. I wish I would say hire someone like Jill, right? If you have a spectacular CFO, or a spectacular COO, in either case, someone that can make sure the trains are running on time, then either the CFO can run the process for you, or the COO can run the company for you while you're running the process. But I think you need one of those two.
I think that balancing that equation, you have to go back to the idea that cash is king, right? So the new role of CFOs, it's just not the same anymore. Back in the day, you took almost all month to look backwards, right, and close the books, and it took 20 days to do it. Just that is such a thing of the past. And now, I would say old school CFOs are actually complaining that you're required to wear multiple hats versus this is where I've been my entire career. And so you have to be able to do it all. You have to be able to add to the business and grow in either role, whether you're out raising cash because that's your best value, or you're back mining the store because that's where your value is, because the CEO will get split so quickly, and then you're not productive. If you're only doing 80% and killing yourself over it, then you're in trouble, because you have to know that that cash need is coming rather than dipping down. You'll lose traction.
Does that answer your question? More questions? Thank you very much. Appreciate it.